Welcome to the Rocks Back Pages podcast. My name is Barney Hoskins. I'm here with my RBP colleagues Mark Pringle.
Hello, Barney.
And Jasper Mearison Bowie.
Hi, Barney.
Hi, Jasper.
Good morning,
Hi,
gentlemen. Great pleasure to be here with you. One of our themes this week is Washington, D.C. And that's partly because Jasper, with our colleague Paul, is heading for Washington, D.C. this week, aren't
Yes,
you?
indeed. We
Chocolate
are
City.
off to ALA, the American Librarians Association annual conference.
It doesn't get any kind of more rock and roll than that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yes. So you're going really to hawk our wares
Yes, quite.
in Capital City.
Yeah.
Good luck.
It should be fun. I've never
Yes,
been.
don't
so
come back empty-handed.
Oh,
But we decided, I think, Mark,
Yeah.
with that, because they were going to Washington, D.C., that we'd think of some Washington, D.C. music
Yep.
that would kind of fit in with this. And it didn't take long for you to go, go, go!
go, go, go.
Go, 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 go!
Go.
Yes.
Yes, go.
So we've got three pieces about the go-go scene, the kind of go-go funk dance scene that emerged in DC
Yep.
in the early 80s.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it had been going for a long time before it emerged. After punk, the English music press specifically became obsessed about scenes, like cities where something was happening, whether it's Manchester or Liverpool or whatever. And Richard Grabel was one of the first, and Simon Witter rapidly after him, New Musical Express, discovered this pre-existing scene in Washington, D.C. And for a while, they posited this idea that it could be compete head-to-head with hip-hop.
Yeah.
Which, in retrospect, was always going to be a dead loss, because go-go was essentially reactionary music. It was old-school funk. It was very much live, large band, live dance music. Very much restricted to DC and Maryland, and sort of some of it is absolutely fabulous, but you know, a little goes a long way, because ultimately it does start sounding kind of the same. And when you're 2 hours into a treble funk set and they don't have a break between tunes, they basically move seamlessly from one, all with the same go-go groove, which is a sort of slightly 6/8-ish sort of skipping feel funk groove.
LT, kick it.
But having said that, I absolutely adore Great Space. One of the pieces you mentioned, it talks about angel dust. That was the recreational drug of choice on the go-go scene.
Do you think Angel Dust made it easier to just listen to that group going on for hours and
Well,
hours and hours?
it's one of the few drugs I've never taken, Barney. I can't actually, kind of, with all honesty, say
We
what
must
the
get you
effect-
some.
Yeah,
Research.
for research purposes. But anyway, it's a really fascinating and closed scene. It's still going now. Go-go is still
it?
going. It's never gone away.
Huh.
It's no longer the big bands. It's often much more electronic, and it's like
Sure.
small bands. But it's still about a live Washington, D.C. ghetto dance scene.
So we
you
can't
know.
use the headline, go, go, going, gone.
No, because it hasn't. You know, it hasn't. You'll find online extensive like radio stations which are dedicated to go-go, all kinds of stuff like that. The other thing about go-go is that even though it never broke out of Washington, D.C. in any sort of significant way, it did end up having a lot of effect on like swing beat producers and so on and so forth. Some of that go-go grooves. I remember once reading when Beyonce was Destiny's Child, talking about one of their tracks, saying, "We got a go-go groove on this."
Yeah.
And this is years after the fact, and Beyonce's referring to a go-go groove. So it had
Definitely influential on that front.
That's really interesting. I mean, I feel rather the same way. That a little goes a long way for me. I did really like the first Trouble Funk album.
Yeah.
I certainly was reading about it in NME. I mean, as you say, NME were very quick onto this. Stuart Cosgrove had quite a lot to do with it. And Ireland then got in on the act.
they made this movie, which was a fiasco by all accounts.
And came out very late.
Yeah.
Too late, really, to do what it was intended to do, which was
capitalise on the
right, really sort of disseminate the scene around
If
the
any
world.
of you are fans of the writer George Pelecanos, who I'm a huge fan of, who wrote a lot of episodes of The Wire and a whole series of books, Go-Go features really heavily in them. They're all set in Washington, D.C. One of the main characters actually runs a record store in D.C., and they go to Go-Go shows all of this kind of stuff, and it's really nice to read it, put it into its sort of context in a fictionalisation. My favourite tune of the lot is Bustin' Loose, Chuck Brown and Soul Searchers, which is just a monstrously great tune. It's in my record bag now. Not that I play DJing sort of malarkey anymore, but it's just a great record. It's a really, really fabulous one.
I feel like bustin' loose, give me the bridge now.
So the three pieces we've got are, you mentioned Richard Grabel, and this was the piece I remember. It was the real introduction to many of us from '84, and it's a really just good piece of kind of reportage and explanation as to exactly what Go-Go is. He does also talk about angel dust and says that the city's mental health facilities have been stretched to breaking point by the side effects. There's no doubt PCP, as it was sort of clinically known, had a devastating effect on many people. It did turn many people into psychotic monsters, didn't it? It's horrible stuff, really.
But having not had any personal experience of being turned into a psychotic monster myself, really wouldn't,
as I say,
wouldn't like to comment any further.
It's for you. And then Simon Witter from 1986, the sort of tail end of the thing, he's saying, well, everyone's saying Go-Go's dead, and it isn't. Actually, it kind of was. The last piece is a lovely piece that Don Snowden, who was an LA-based writer, wrote for us when Chuck Brown, the godfather of the whole scene, died in 2012, I think. And he writes about seeing Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. It was one of only 2 times in my life that I experienced the feeling that the band didn't just come on stage and play their set. They came out and plugged in and played music that was already there, only you could hear it now because they were playing what was flowing through the air.
Right.
And he explains that Brown had said that Go-Go got its name simply because the rhythm just goes on and on.
Yeah.
And there's also a nice little story about 2 white punk boys driving to Washington, pulling over when a Trouble Funk track came on the radio, and they were just so floored by Ian Mackay of Minor Threat and Henry Rollins later of Black Flag. So it did cross over, and I was interested to hear what you said about the influence on swing beat. It hadn't actually, I must confess, occurred to me, but I can hear it.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is what was said earlier about it being regarded as a possible competitor to hip-hop. Hip-hop was the future. I mean, 83, 84, 85, hip-hop was just exploding out. Run DMC had just had their first big hits a year or so before. It was always going to win that particular battle. It was in a very weird kind of the way this English journalistic obsession with discovering something.
It seems kind of strange to me to position it even as a battle between hip-hop and Go. I mean, to me, maybe this is just a retrospective thing, but it feels like Go-Go in a way is a form of, or is hip-hop with a certain kind of beat, basically. I mean, not directly, but there's spoken word rapping that goes on it, and it has a lot of similarities.
I'd say the major difference is that Go-Go was a band-driven music.
Yeah, that's a fair point, for sure.
And hip-hop was a turntable-driven music, and everything that followed from that, like use of sampling,
in a way, you're not entirely wrong, I think, to suggest that Go-Go was kind of funk in the era of hip-hop.
Yeah.
It had that sort of element.
Yeah.
And there were some great records. Yeah. And also there was some cross-pollination between the two forms. There were hip-hop artists who collaborated with them. I think Experience Unlimited played on maybe a Curtis Blow track.
That's right.
Things like that happened.
Also, a lot of Go-Go was sampled and used in various hip-hop
Not
things.
Surprising.
Anyway, it's great stuff.
Thinking of a master plan. This ain't nothing but sweat inside my hands. So I dig into my pocket, all my money spent. So I get deeper, but still coming up with lint.
We're actually then going to kind of roll the tape back just a few years to a very different kind of dance music with this week's audio, Mark. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is the wonderful Anita Ward, who I'm sure many of our listeners will know she's a classic one-hit wonder. She had a song called Ring My Bell, which was a huge, kind of late popular disco hit. It came out
79,
which is just when Comiskey Park happened,
tail end of disco
and so on. It's a charming podcast because she sounds like just a delightful woman, who's been through this experience of being a one-hit wonder artist, who then went back, slogged around the Chitlin circuit, pretty much gave up, and then has kind of eased her way back into performing, partly in sort of the nostalgia industry. So let's listen to the first clip. This is her talking about her own response to Ring My Bell. She didn't like it very much.
This disco wasn't exactly your thing, from what I understand.
No.
So, what was you thinking when you did it?
First of all, I just did what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
Is no, and any artist, and know when you first starting out, that's what you do mostly. Is
You have somebody
do
steering you.
whatever you're told, and unless of course you own the company.
Yeah.
And you know, so on and so forth. So, but no, I didn't like it. I didn't like the song. I thought it was a silly song. Because I'm more, my personality, I'm more serious.
Have a little more gravity to what you do?
Right, because even if I tell a joke, it's probably dry. You don't know, but seriously.
Yeah.
I'm just more, I would have liked to have done a song such as I Will Always Love You. Like, who wouldn't want to have a ballad?
The Dolly
I like
Parton
ballads.
and Whitney Houston song.
I liked ballads.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, the way, if I'm going to be a star, I wish it was me having done a ballad.
Yeah.
But you see, some of that was because I didn't understand the business.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
But I, being so young,
Yeah.
I thought it was cute, but I just thought it was too cute.
Too cute.
I said, I don't know. But then, when my manager and others said, well, we wanted to put out something. If you're a brand new artist, they've never seen or heard of you.
Right.
You want to put something out there that's going to get their attention, catchy,
Yeah.
like they're going to want to sing it.
Yeah.
It's not difficult.
Yeah.
So that's what that's like the hook line. The hook line was amazing.
I find it fascinating. It shows how little agency this artists, and particularly female artists, had in their careers.
There's an interesting bit where she talks about how she was only told afterwards that it had actually been written for somebody else.
That's right.
And how she was confused at why she'd even been told that, sort of, because it was just made her feel kind of a bit small. And
she wanted to sing ballads. In fact, she mentions in she would love to sing like Whitney Houston type ballads, And she was really uncomfortable with this very poppy sort of dance tune.
With some kind of innuendo there. Let's just leave it at that. But this very kind of little girlish voice that she uses. I mean, I think it's a fabulous record. I've always absolutely adored it. And there can't be many people on earth who don't know. If you say Ring My Bell, everybody's heard that.
And it's got
record.
that iconic sort of...
the syndrome. The syndrome. In fact, at one point, Tom Graves, in the interview, says, right now, somewhere in the world, that record is being played. What's really nice is that, due to various series of accidents, she discovered that, A, she hadn't been paid when she should have been paid, and that she had the contracts to sort of prove this. And also organisations were getting going who were helping artists collect their royalties. That Malaco Records had put out it had gone onto a movie soundtrack. And her husband said, why aren't you being paid for this? And so she started making inquiries. And as lawyer came on board to do some pro bono work, next thing you knew, she way years after the fact, she starts getting paid.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So she can afford to eat in the restaurant where they're talking. It starts off, it's lovely, and they spend really about 10 minutes talking about food, don't they?
Well, because
Tom's working on a cookery book.
That's right, yeah.
Or a book about food, some kind of book about food. And she talks about the beans. She's eating compliments.
She also
the guy, the waiter,
infuses at length about her grandmother's lemon cake.
Yeah.
Which made me want to eat some lemon. I have to say, since hearing it, I'm craving lemon cake.
You want that recipe, don't you? You have to buy Tom's book. Maybe it's in there. But it's a lovely conversation between really two Southerners. I could listen to Southerners talk till the cows come home. And it's just delight. She's so charming and just so...
There's no bitterness there. There's no sort of, I mean, for a start, she was a bright, interesting woman. She'd gone to college. She had worked as a teacher. This is not some sort of desperate scrabbling, I need this to do. We'll listen later at the end of the podcast of how taken by surprise she was by what a hit it was, that she was working as a teacher.
Yeah,
I think her husband said, you do that because you never know what's going to happen with this pop music. Right. And next thing you know, she's got to go and do a TV show.
She's got to go and do Wolfman Jack's show in California. And she goes, but I'm teaching tomorrow.
I just had to go to Memphis to buy a frock. So all that sort of stuff.
It was so instant. It was kind of literally, her manager calls her up and says, your record's gone gold.
Yes.
But I've got to teach tomorrow. And it went, I think went to number one, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it did. No, they talk about that at some length. It may be one of the few Memphis records to actually go to number one.
Properly.
I think it's an incredibly sexy record, actually. I remember...
Steady on, Barney.
I know, but I associate it with a particular memory of sort of watching this girl dance, and I just loved the record. Frederick Knight wrote it and produced it.
Yeah, well, and again, she had run-ins with Frederick Knight.
Yeah.
You know, it was the usual thing of, like, she had no say in her career and what to do. No. And interesting that her management was taken over by a big management company when she had the hit. But when the hit stopped coming, which was almost immediately, the big management company lost interest in her entirely. She'd been better off staying, but her original manager was dying, ill with health. So kind of a lot of things kind of collected to kind of...
Yeah, she talks about the chittering circuit, you know, what we call the chitlin circuit, the chittering. She pronounces it properly. Oh, it's one. I mean, in some ways, Mark, an interview with a one-hit wonder is really quite interesting.
It's very interesting.
And in a way, you really are only talking about one piece of music. I mean, she made a number of albums and she sung a lot of very different sorts of songs, ballads, clearly what she wanted to do. She'd grown up in the church singing gospel.
I thought that was interesting, the way she talked about being a gospel singer first and foremost. Her parents, the classic story, her parents saying, no, you can't go and make a record. She was, even before the whole Ring My Bell thing, she was kind of scouted
She's
by
hanging
a
around
label.
at Arden Studios in Memphis.
And I hadn't realised she'd been... No. She probably was doing backing vocals.
May well have been.
I
don't know.
But she wasn't allowed to go and make her own record initially, and so she...
But actually, Barney, what you're saying is absolutely really interesting, because she's a one-hit wonder whose hit was so huge over decades that you can listen to her talk about this one song, and it's fascinating.
It is, actually.
You know, it is. It's really something,
because it's such an extraordinary experience to have. You know, to have one record that was gigantic, and then really not much else after that.
And then she had this car crash, really major car crash, and she has had and continues to have no sense of smell.
Really?
Yeah, she says that in the interview. She says that one of the byproducts of this car crash, she can't. And Tom says, well, what about tasting food? She says, well, it has an effect on that, you know, which of course it does. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, we have, I think, a couple of other Tom Graves audio interviews. I know there's one with Barry Manilow. but interestingly, one we added not that long ago, Mark, was the one with Millie Small, My Boy Lollipop.
That's right.
Again, a one-hit wonder.
Yes.
And he mentions it during the... As it turns out, Anita's never heard of My Boy Lollipop.
No.
But it reminded me of that conversation where you really are talking about this extraordinary impact of one record.
Yeah.
But it's really charming.
I love to say that Millie's living about sort of a quarter of a mile from where we're sitting right now.
Millie wasn't she?
Is.
That's right.
I think she still is.
She's still there.
She's just up the road.
Get her in for the podcast.
Yes. We actually got her address on that interview, but I decided to kind of cut that out of the broadcast version.
Good idea. Sensible man.
Okay, so what next?
Well, I think we are going to change direction very radically here.
Another
because
RBP podcast, Radical Right Turn.
Radical Right Turn or Left Turn. 5 years ago, almost to the day, we lost Felix Dennis, the legendary, notorious Felix Dennis, who was one of the three main guys in the Oz trial, the trial of Oz magazine on conspiracy charges, as I was reminded by the piece that we've included by him. Felix was an extraordinary character. And funnily enough, when we were getting Rock's Back Pages off the ground, Matt Snow and I went to see Felix in his Covent Garden lair, trying to get some money out of him. At that point, he was probably worth £500 million, and we couldn't get a single dime out of him.
Well, that's because it's too busy spending it on crack, wasn't he?
Well, no, he wasn't actually. Crack was behind him, but he did say, "You can use my stuff on Rock's Back Pages." That was as generous as he was prepared to be. But Felix, at that point, was a sort of publishing magnate. He had started this empire. Extraordinary. I mean, really brilliant, smart guy.
Doing kung fu magazines and stuff, wasn't it?
Just anything he could do a magazine about.
Any craze.
Computers. I mean, he was very early on in
Yep.
the kind of how to use iMacs and all that kind of stuff.
Or even
All of
before
those
that,
things that you see in,
Sinclair,
Yeah.
that sort of...
But he goes back to the
Yeah.
sort of dawn of underground music journalism.
Yeah.
Because Oz, apart from anything else, was featured music. It was covering the
Yeah.
counterculture.
Yeah.
You read Oz. So we've got his review of the very first Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah.
Which apparently was that world exclusive, the first review of that album. Is what
didn't even know
Wikipedia
that,
says
Jasper.
about this. Apparently that was this
was
is
the
the first
Right.
published review
Well, that-
of Led Zeppelin.
That
Led
makes
Zeppelin.
it all the more startling that he says very boldly from the word go. Very occasionally, a long-playing record is released that defies immediate classification or description, simply because it's so obviously a turning point in rock music that only time proves capable of shifting it into eventual perspective.
In the days of my youth, I was told what it means to be a man.
And he writes rather well about.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he was. I think he squandered his talent.
Well, well, first of all, he wasn't. I mean, his job at Oz wasn't editorial. He
No.
was a sales guy, essentially.
Really?
Yeah.
And that was the reaon why he got a shorter sentence at the Oz trial than Richard Neville and
the other guy.
the other guy. Yeah,
The other guy.
the other, because the judge looked on him as sort of contempt, as basically just the office boy. You know, you weren't responsible for this disgusting, salacious stuff that Mr. Neville was thrusting down our kids' throats, you know. And so Felix was has always spent a lot of his life being underestimated by people. You know, he was regarded as the office junior at Oz. He was the one who went on to make an absolute fortune. Richard Neville didn't quite interesting writing, but basically went back to Australia. And the other guy, whose name entirely escapes us.
The guy we're renaming. The other guy.
It is that memorable. I read School Kids' issue of Oz when it came out. My brother was a big Oz reader. And of course, you know, at the age of like, I don't know what I was, 13 or something like that, is just fantastic stuff, you know, with, you know, filthy cartoons of Rupert Bear shagging one of Robert Crumb's sort of buxom wenches. And all of this sort of stuff. And Charlie Murray, whose very first writing was in School Kids' issue of Oz, I believe he wrote about shagging to Led Zeppelin, no less.
It was all going on.
It was all going on. And I was actually fascinated. And that trial...
And so the trial was for the publication of those kinds of salacious
Yeah,
comics, right?
That exact issue, the School Kids issue, was what it was about. At my school at the time, we were all riveted by this. It was a major story. I mean, Barney, you were saying he talks about how he got John Mortimer and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so there's this piece from 2009, one of his most successful magazines, The Week, which is still going, which is a digest of global digest of the week's news. And it's just a reminiscence about the trial in the summer of 71 and how they couldn't get anyone to represent them. Time was running out. And then John Mortimer just sort of took his fancy.
Yeah.
And he thought, I'm going to represent these guys. And apparently he was just brilliant.
Of course, they lost the first trial. They were convicted. They had their hair cut off at Brixton, I seem to remember.
Absolutely.
At the time, was this major, the pigs sticking it to our people, you know.
Yeah. Jar Jar Gar was determined to send them down for a long, long stretch.
Yeah.
I mean, there were echoes of, you know, Mick and Keith and the whole, you know, To Break a Butterfly Upon a Wheel, you know, the Stones trial, all of this stuff. I mean, the establishment was trying to get the counterculture.
Yeah.
And in great part because of John Mortimer's efforts to discredit the fact that they were being charged under a law that had lain dormant for over 100 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and they did do a little bit of jail time because they had sent these sort of, you know, prohibited materials through the post, ostensibly to people, children, really.
Right.
So they did a little bit of time in Wandsworth and Wormwood Scrubs,
Yeah.
but there was such an outcry that they came out pretty quickly after that, thank God.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting piece by him. There's also a profile of Felix by Sean O'Hagan from 2013, which was just less than a year before Felix died, because he was diagnosed with cancer. And the other piece that I selected is an interesting piece from 71 in Ink magazine.
Yeah.
Tell me just quickly what Ink magazine is.
Ink was a
spin-off.
It was a spin-off of Oz, which was an attempt to sort of capture the sort of the underground tabloid market.
Right.
Oz was a magazine, very highly coloured, very, very decorated,
Yes.
almost unreadable at times. Ink was attempting to do something slightly more sober, with more politics in it, more
Yes.
long-form articles of that sort of description.
Yes.
It didn't last all that long, I don't seem to remember, dear
Okay.
old Ink, but it was a valiant try.
Well, so this piece, I'm guessing, must have been written not long after the trial. And so the issue date, 2nd November 1971. It's really apropos John Lennon's Imagine album. And it's an attempt to kind of explain where John Lennon sits within the sort of countercultural frame as a result of, breaking up the Beatles. And there's some interesting stuff in there, actually. I mean, he says, Felix writes, who stands now against this loud-mouthed braggart of a walrus? And he lists the various people who don't stand against that. And in the end, he goes, one man stands against him. His name is John Lennon. It's himself. And there's a very interesting sentence here. This slowly emerging, uncompromising, and at times painfully embarrassing dialogue between Lennon, the working-class hero, and Lennon, the apple-rich superstar, represents to many observers a nauseating and repetitive exercise in self-delusion and hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Well,
that's an argument you could still have with a number of people going back and forth. I mean, it's good writing.
It is good writing. And he was a very bright man.
And the thing is, but he never took himself seriously as a writer.
No.
He always had other fish to fry, or crack to smoke, or whatever it was. How long he had a long stretch as a very rich man of basically hookers and cocaine.
Well,
didn't
yeah.
he?
So I mean, in Sean's profile,
sorry, he's going to lower the tone again.
But no, it's great. So this is 2013. Felix is a self-confessed dissolute who heads the multi-million-pound Dennis publishing empire. Sean asked him, well, how did you, establish this empire when you were sort of essentially living on the crack pipe? And Felix goes, yes, I built a NASDAQ company turning over 2.5 million a year while on crack cocaine. How? I ask incredulously. Easy. I never slept for 5 years. And he had a really interesting last few years, didn't he? Because he was planting all these trees everywhere, and he became a poet. And he used to
terrible poet.
Terrible poet.
Oh my God!
But he didn't think he was which is all that really matters. He thought he was great, and he would do these tours, and he'd get people in to listen to his awful poems by offering them really rather good wine. You'd get a glass of quite good red wine because he had a huge wine collection.
I could have dealt with the wine collection.
Were you not? Did you not get the newsletter, the email? I mean, he would have been a shoe-in there. But so that's what he was doing. He wrote poems, and one tour was called "Did I Mention the Free Wine?" And people just
Clearly
showed
had
up
a very
in
keen
droves.
sense of what his audience wanted, both when it came to building a magazine empire and when it came to his poetry.
He was a very shrewd guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he did have a very high opinion of himself. But you sort of forgave it because actually he was an immensely entertaining kind of bon vivant.
Yeah.
So this is marking the 5-year anniversary of Felix Dennis's passing.
Who is missed? As a mad character.
Even if he didn't invest in Rock's Back Pages.
And even if his poetry was bloody awful.
He could have been a really great rock critic. Mark, tell us about the library highlights.
Well, I mean, I go straight to 1967. In his own words, but interviewed by Ann Moses, New Musical Express, as Mike Nesmith, then of the Monkees. And he's clearly decided to position himself as interesting by being a miserable sod.
Ah, yes, the tried and true tactic of sulking.
It's worked for many.
And this is great. He says, high school was the most noticeable drag. High school kids are such a drag. Not all high school kids, but my high school kids.
Boo-hoo.
And then later on says, I never dated much. I couldn't get a date. I'd call up and say, oh, would you like to go out? And they'd say, no, I don't like you.
It's the original Morrissey, isn't it?
He absolutely. And the thing is, he talks about how his poverty-stricken upbringing, which I'm sure was true up to a point. He skates over the fact his mother invented what became known as liquid paper, Tipex.
Yeah.
And created a multi-million-pound company. She was working as a secretary and she invented Tipex. And so, in fact, by this point, Nesmith was rolling in family
He
cash.
never really had to work,
No.
Mike Nesmith.
Interesting,
Even
I mean-
though Tipex obviously doesn't mean an awful lot.
I mean,
these
he was
days.
one of the pioneers of music videos stuff. And he's made a lot of really kind of fairly indifferent records, you know, as a sort of solo artist.
Quite like the early stuff,
Yeah.
you know. I like some of his contributions to the Monkees, more experimental
Yeah.
albums, and I
And then he-
like some of the country rock
And
stuff.
he worked
First
with
National Bank.
and with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. He did
Sure.
stuff with them and so on. Interesting character, but his relentless miserablism does get you down.
And sort of superciliousness, which he shares with sort of people like Frank Zappa,
Yeah.
just like lauding his intelligence
Yeah.
over lesser mortals, which is just slightly distasteful.
really.
I've read, in my job at Rock's back pages, I've read a number of interviews.
Is that who you work for?
I'm afraid so, yeah.
Jesus, that explains why you've been hanging around for
And I've read a lot of interviews with Nesmith, and he just comes over as, actually, I have to say, not a very nice person. Not someone I'd like to spend any time with. Moving swiftly on, very interesting interview with Reverend Gary Davis by Carl Dallas in Melody Maker in 71. This is a year before Gary Davis died, and he's living in New York, and he talks about what a struggle it is for a man of his age. He said, you know, he keeps having his guitar stolen. He keeps having his flat cleaned out, you know. He's a vulnerable guy. He's blind, remember. You know, he says, anything that happens in New York, don't get surprised. You can't make no friends with nobody in New York, you know.
You'd think someone would have said, Reverend Gary, New York, maybe not the most sensible place for a sort of street blues guy, blind street blues guy.
And also, he was sitting there and watching white boys like Stephen Grossman, who was massively influenced by him, clean up on the college circuit. You know, and it's.
I mean, he did play the college circuit. He was
did.
adopted by the folk scene in the 60s. So he had a kind of second wind that an awful lot of blues performers didn't get. Nonetheless, I can absolutely understand that sort of being in New York in 1971 would have been a pretty hazardous,
tough time to
experience.
Yes.
Well, they leave you standing and crying in the land.
April 72, Grateful Dead, Empire Pool, Wembley, Roy
I wonder
Carr.
why you want to talk about this, Mark.
Well,
do you like the Grateful Dead?
Just a little bit, Barney. Just a little bit. And I saw them on that tour. I saw them at the Lyceum in May of 72. And it was one of the great shows I've ever seen in my life. Barney and I, we both loved the Live in Europe album that came
Europe
out of
72, I adore it. And that was where I came in. But I was too young to see them on that tour, but I felt like I kind of experienced that tour vicariously through that triple album.
Absolutely. And then subsequently, because they recorded the whole tour of Europe, every single minute of that tour just about has been released. And
you've listened to it?
Well, I have listened to large swathes of it. The one thing I discovered, slightly to my mortification, is that the night I saw them at Lyceum was probably the worst of the 4 nights they did at the Lyceum. But actually, even so, it is fantastic. And in a way, that was both the best and also, I would say, getting towards the end of the Grateful Dead as a creative force. I mean, they went on forever afterwards, right till Gus Garcia died in 95. But I'd say that their last decent studio album was like a couple of years later, Mars Hotel. And oddly enough, the cleaner their sound system came, the less interesting they sounded. They lost the warmth that had driven them back in those days.
And the music on Europe 72 is nothing if not warm. There's a real warmth, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's my favourite. I know it's not probably your favourite. It's my favourite period Dead. Because I loved American Beauty and I loved Working Man's. I mean, essentially, they almost invented Americana in that period.
Robert Hunt was fed up with that album because he reckoned those songs should have gone onto a studio recorded album, stuff like Jack Straw and so on and so forth, which all debuted on.
Some of my favourite. I mean, Jack Straw, I just worship.
Absolutely, and he thinks they should have been recorded properly. I just think they work so well as a band live.
I think the sound is beautiful on that record. It's really well recorded.
Though they did overdub a lot of the vocals back in America.
Leaving Texas, 4th day of July. Sun so hot, the clouds so low, the eagles fill the sky.
I saw them 2 years later at Alexandra Palace with their huge wall sound system. They were awful.
Well, I saw that show too, and it was, I mean, as a sort of 15-year-old sort of neophyte deadhead, it was disappointing.
Yeah.
I managed to sort of escape from boarding school and get up to Ali Pali, and I was really underwhelmed.
There's one great story about that tour, is that notorious criminal / shagger of Princess Margaret, John Bindon, gangster, basically.
Lovely guy.
Befriended the band, largely because he's had the source of the best cocaine in London, yeah? And he walked off with all the gate receipts from the Ali Pali shows, the whole lot. He just walked off with all the money.
Well,
and the Dead just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, easy come, easy go. Hey, man.
Well, I mean, he was a villain. And he
villain.
later crops up in the Led Zeppelin story as one of Peter Grant's heavies.
Yeah.
Thoroughly disreputable and I think probably psychopathic individual with an enormous tool.
That's right, who apparently could balance
pint glasses on
beer
on the end of his erect member.
Yes.
So we've really hit rock bottom. for tone on this episode, that was it.
Okay, moving swiftly on.
But in the absence of a guest,
You've got to get something to keep the listeners interested.
Fact, John Bindon's member is really the sort of unofficial special guest.
Anyway, moving swiftly on to NME 1973, again Roy Carr. This is gold dust because there are not many of them. An interview with Gram Parsons.
Saint Gram.
Who Barney and I just adore. I particularly adore his solo stuff, the stuff he did at the very end of his life, his last 2 albums. I really like the Burritos, but it's about...
The first album.
And certain songs on the first, Hot Burrito #1 and so on and so forth. But his 2 solo albums were his genuine reversion to actual genuine country type. They are, I wouldn't call them country rock records, they are country albums, the last 2. He discovered singing in a Washington nightclub, Emmylou Harris, who had this perfect voice to match his. And it talks about it in this interview that he got basically Elvis Presley's band to back him on those albums. Ron Tutt,
James
Burton, and
Andy Hardin on piano. I mean, it's a fantastic.
I mean, he says here, I'd say I'm a contemporary country music artist with an electric rock and roll band. Well, I don't think he is on those records. He says country music isn't bubblegum, and it isn't geared to sell like bubblegum. It's sincere in the same way as R&B and B.B. King. Which is interesting because with the Burritos, he was investigating that area where soul music meets country music.
Yeah, well, he does great version of Do Right Woman, Do Right Man.
Yeah.
So if you wanna do right, all day woman, you gotta be a do right, all on that plane.
I prefer the solo albums.
Yes.
And I still play them. I still love them. Great songs, great covers, great feel, great vibe. But of course, they didn't sell very well. And it's only really after he died of a drug overdose in 73 in Joshua Tree that he sort of starts to become this kind of cult figure.
Yeah.
And he really is sort of one of the architects now of alternative country or whatever the hell you want to call it. Influenced so many people. Influenced the Eagles, I mean,
without Gram,
the
LA country rock scene probably wouldn't have existed in the form that it had.
Well, of course, he'd been the Byrds' country album, Sweet Out of the Radio. He was such an important part of that.
The more I played with the Byrds, the more I wished I could get them to do real country songs like That's All It Took.
Yes. Well, see, to me, That's All It Took. That version of, can't remember who wrote the song now, but it wasn't a Gram original.
Yes.
But to me, it's one of the greatest country records ever made.
Yeah. He talks about leaving the Byrds. He goes along with the sort of myth he himself created that he left because they were going to tour South Africa and he couldn't play segregated audiences. He says that here. I was raised in the South by some wonderful black people, and what common sense I have I owe to them, which is kind of slightly patronising to say, listen, man, I couldn't play before segregated audiences. That's something no person should ever do. And he says, I think the South African government are nothing but a bunch of skunks, really behind the rest of the civilised world. One always felt that he was taught to say all this stuff by Keith Richards or someone.
Well, of course, when he came to London with the Byrds in '68, they were due to go and play in South Africa.
Right.
Gram went off with Mick and Keith to Stonehenge to sort of trip for the night, and it really was like Mick Keith said, "Man, you can't go to South Africa, man." So Gram went back to London and told Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman that he wasn't going to South Africa, which pissed them off no end. But that was the sort of context.
We were talking last week about this huge Scorsese Dylan Rolling Thunder.
It's a sort of docu-mock-you. There's a mock-you elements in it.
And heavily featured in this is Larry Sloman, who was writing it up for Rolling Stone.
Ratso.
4th of December 1975. And it's a good piece of very straightforward reporting. He starts from right the early days before the tour even started, where it was 4 o'clock on a brandy-soaked October Thursday morning in Greenwich Village. There's about 20 friends and associated hangers-on gathered in the shutter-to-the-public other end to hear Bob Dylan and his friends pick a few tunes. This is basically when Bob was assembling the cast of characters who would become the Rolling Thunder Review. This extensive report then takes you through to the early gigs and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Good piece of straightforward writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very funny element in the movie is I think we've gone past spoiler alert here. There's this brilliant character that they invent who's this sort of supposedly the original director of a film that never came out, and he's a sort of German or Austrian guy with sort of swept up hair called Stefan Van Dorn.
I'm not sure I even understood that this is a mythical character.
Yeah, he didn't exist.
I was just watching.
It was a conceit that Dylan and Scorsese came up with, and at one point he sits there and he bad-mouths Larry Sloman, and says Ratso. That was Larry's nickname. He was the worst of the worst, and then you hear Larry speaking. It's very amusing. But Larry was the guy. He was the Rolling Stone reporter who sort of embedded himself in this ramshackle traveller.
I heard the sound of a thunder that roared out a warning.
Cream 1977, Robert Duncan goes up to what is in fact a cinema just outside New York where Kiss are recording yet another Kiss album. And a typical Robert Duncan thing where Robert won't just write it up as a straightforward report and interview. He has to create this almost semi-mythologized first half where he is entering the mothership and all this sort of stuff.
Sounds quite entertaining.
But it is pretty good, and Paul Stanley, the guitar player, comes over as a complete twat. Kiss Alive is an album. I mean, you could give it to somebody and say, "This is rock and roll. That album is rock and roll." Well, Paul,
maybe not.
Maybe not. But it's a highly entertaining piece, and in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be publishing the second half of it, which is Robert Duncan's audience with Gene Simmons.
One of those stranger facts, just backtrack for 2 seconds, because it's a funny footnote. Stranger things in Rolling Thunder is Dylan talking about going with a young Sharon Stone to visit Gene Simmons backstage. Sharon Stone, I believe, was dating Gene Simmons.
It's the tongue.
It was the tongue that did it. And so Dylan's there backstage at a Kiss show and sort of gets the idea for the face painting. It was such an important part of Rolling Thunder because he looks at Gene Simmons and thinks, this is interesting. I mean, you assumed it was like kabuki theatre
but someone should have told
Gene Simmons.
Someone should have told Bob that if you're going to put face paint in your face, have a shave first, because it really doesn't look too great.
I've seen some of the clips.
Yes.
But as I'm saying that now, I'm wondering whether, in fact, that is completely sort of false, and in fact, possibly they just invented that whole story.
No
about
idea.
Sharon Stone and Gene Simmons.
Sounds 1979. This is interesting. It's a very early sort of write-up of U2. Dave McCulloch, again talking about Go-Go, is this searching for scenes, and he goes to Dublin to search for this putative Irish rock scene.
Mm-hmm.
Bands like the Virgin Prunes and all that. He's picked up in an Austin A40 by Bono at the airport. And
Austin A40. I suppose Bono drives that anyway.
Dave McCulloch completely buys into U2, as did so many people at the time.
They were the saviours of rock, weren't they?
Yeah, until
they weren't.
Until they weren't. Okay, moving hugely on, 1997, Barbara Ellen in The Observer basically spends an evening in the company of Peter Andre,
now we're getting to the real heart of rock and roll.
The six-pack, stomached Australian heartthrob of reality TV. And she, of course, being Barbara Ellen, just the most fabulously mocking writer. Andre is very slight, even with his legs and arms flung out as wide as they can go, and wearing a jacket that a small child could use as a Wendy house. He only takes up half an inch of space. Andre is so titchy that I keep worrying he might slip down the back of the seat like loose change. Then I have to fish him out by his trademark sticky-up fringe, which usually resembles an octopus doing the can-can, but today looks very limp and jet-lagged. And moving swiftly on. Just as I'm leaving, Andre makes a point of poking me in the arm. You know, he grins through gritted teeth, still obviously stung by my bland and boring inquiry. I bet I have a lot more fun than most people. A 5 at Ladbrokes says he doesn't. Fast forward to today in The Guardian, Simon Hatton interviewing Peter Andre, and literally months after that Barbara Ellen report took place, he had a complete breakdown. So he wasn't having a lot more fun than most people.
No.
And he actually he disappeared off the face of the planet for about 2 years. Had massive anxiety attacks, therapy, blah, blah, blah. Which is, but it's interesting that Barbara Ellen kind of spotted
clocked
that.
on that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my lot.
That's your lot, thank you. Well, just a couple of things, really. Given the massive Radiohead hack and leak last week... What's that sound, Jasper? I think it's... Is that a helicopter outside the window? Oh, no.
Mark's not wanting to
fallen
listen
asleep.
to 18 hours of Radiohead.
Right, well, we'll force him to do that later. But this is so we've added a review of Hail to the Thief from 2003. And there's a little Q&A with Thomas York, Mark's hero, where he just... Stephen Dalton, the reviewer, asks him about OK Computer. And he says, OK Computer was everyone else's property. Everyone else had invested a lot of energy in it, which started off being really positive and then just got really weird. That's what happens when a band goes ballistic like that. You just come out at the end of it going, what was that about? And I suspect that must have been the case for Radiohead, because OK Computer just sort of blew them stratospheric. And in a way... Tom York never really recovered from that, but I think "Hail to the Thief" is a great album.
It's not one of their albums I've listened to that much. I have to say,
Well, I'm going to stick my neck out. I think it's a really great record.
Fair enough.
So there we go. And then finally, just because I happened to be just perusing this morning, an interview with Baxter Dury, son of the late Ian Dury.
I've seen him.
You've seen
good.
him.
Yeah.
He's good, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a really interesting guy. Grew up in a very interesting household. And he reminisces in this piece. A new writer that's come on board, Jamie Atkins, a record collector. He talks quite a lot in this piece, does Baxter, about his dad and about the Blockheads. And I just picked out a couple of quotes. All the dudes that were in our dad's band didn't really know the difference between punk and funk. They just played. And he says, Dad was punk because he couldn't sing and he was into words and like dressing up offensively. But actually, all they were into was Funkadelic, Sly and the Family Stone, and Miles Davis and all that stuff.
Well, Chas Jankel was an avid jazz funk man, you know.
He was a jazz funketeer.
It was an interesting band because you had Norman Watt-Roy, Charlie Charles on drums.
Great players.
And they were all essentially kind of black R&B sort of bass players. And then you had Endure up front.
Yes.
And sort of, it worked.
It just worked, didn't it? Against all the odds.
For a couple of albums, you know.
And Mark, you'll like to see, this is what we'll end on. You will enjoy the fact that Baxter had just recorded his Prince of Tears album at the Church Studios in Crouch End.
That's gone.
I don't know if it has. It gone now?
Yeah,
it has gone now.
Yeah, it's gone.
Well, so apparently he used to be owned by Dave Stewart, and that was how we ended up there, because Dave was an early advocate of Rock's Back Pages and a friend to us. Dave gave us a great deal on that. It's a beautiful building. The players were amazing and they were loving it, because you've got this swearing loony coming out of the speakers. I don't know if he's referring to Dad the swearing loony or himself.
I think
the
maybe
swearing
himself,
loony.
possibly.
Is he also
He's pretty interesting on record. He does a kind of spoken word vocal performance on a lot of his tracks, and it's quite dark.
I'm a turgid, fucked up little goat pissing on your fucking hill. I'm Miami.
This is your time to shine, of course, because you are now going to tell us about one of your favourite bands.
One of my favourite bands, particularly as a live experience. I found this piece because I went to see... I mean, this is a live review of Foals.
Not the Foals.
Just Foals.
Just Foals, yeah.
Actually,
no definite article there.
No definite article there.
Very
and their
important.
support act when I just saw them, kept referring to them as The Foals. It was pretty disastrous, and it was a pretty disastrous support act as well. But anyway, that's beside the point. This is a live review of Foals at Ali Pali in 2014 by Ian Gittins in The Guardian. And he says, this once spindly, precocious art rock band who appeared destined to be no more than the perennial soundtrack to student discos everywhere have transformed into a vital, vivacious and thrillingly spontaneous pop group capable of holding arenas in the palms of their hands. Where once Foals' oblique math rock and angular arabesques merely felt arch and clever, now brooding yet winning tracks like Inhaler and Providence boast choruses that hit like avalanches and have the entire hall bellowing along.
I'll take your word for it.
They are really one of the best bands I've seen live. Oddly, it took seeing them live for me to really start loving their recorded output as well. I mean, that's an experience I think that a few people I've spoken to had where they liked them enough on the studio stuff and then went to see them and like, wow, these guys are really,
I find
really
that very encouraging because it's not often that you see bands live doing anything different than they do on record for a start. That they tend to replicate the experience as closely as possible, and to have someone actually do something which is different enough to make you then go back and reassess the recorded stuff. That's really good.
And interestingly, although Ian Gittins says that where once the oblique math rock and angular arabesque sort of met, like he kind of dismisses that as being soundtrack to student discos, they still do that stuff live, and it's among the best stuff they do. They have the encore is usually a song called Two Steps Twice, which is from their first album, and it just turns into this very long breakdown and everyone just loses it, and the crowd really love it. It's a really nice crowd as well because it's a rock crowd and people are moshing and everything, but it's not violent, it's not unpleasant, it's pretty high-spirited.
Am I right in saying you went to see them on Saturday night?
Yeah, I went to see them on Saturday night, which is why I found this piece. And I saw them in Birmingham, actually, because they're doing a tour at the moment where they will be at Ali Pali as well, but that's when I'm going to be in DC. So we figured we'd go see them in Birmingham at the Digbeth Arena, which
classy.
Yeah. But actually it's a pretty cool venue. It's sort of like outdoor space, 3,500 people, so it's a bit smaller than Ali Pali, which is nice as well. I always prefer slightly, and it managed to feel quite intimate, and I think we were in a pretty perfect spot, relatively close to the stage, right in the mosh pit. My favourite. It was great.
Good stuff.
Did you get hurt, Jasper?
No, not really. No.
So
the massive bruise on my elbow.
So this is Jasper performing this function of listening to music so we don't have to.
That's why we employed him.
But it was very funny.
I like the Foals stuff you've played.
Yeah.
I love that song, My Number. Did they play My Number?
They played My Number. The set list was fantastic. They've released 5 studio albums now, and they played stuff from every single album, and it really felt like they weren't just doing the new stuff because they have to. They really do like the
You don't have my number, but we don't need each other now. We don't need the city.
One little sort of funny thing because I was in Birmingham during the day beforehand, we were just walking around exploring the delights that Birmingham has to offer. And we happened to walk past Birmingham Arena as opposed to Digbeth Arena, and there was a gig there as well. And we were trying to guess who was playing based on the crowd of people that had lined up. I thought it might be I didn't guess which, but I thought it might be a boy band of some kind, and my friend Lawrence thought it might be the Spice Girls, because obviously they've been doing that. We looked it up, and it was, in fact, the Backstreet Boys.
Yes.
So there
I'm
you go.
disappointed it wasn't Peter Andre. That
That would have been a real perfect setting.
Everybody, rock your body right. Backstreet's back, alright.
Backstreet's back, alright.
Excellent. Good stuff. You're whizzing off to Washington, D.C. tomorrow.
Day after.
Wednesday.
Have a fantastic time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this episode will come
give
out
our
when
love to
I'm
the
there.
president.
Well, yes.
When I-
love, do you mean like cream pie or?
When I was in Washington a few years ago, we were walking down towards the White House, and suddenly this massive police sort of cavalcade thing. Obama went past in the presidential limousine. Maybe you'll have a similar experience.
Similar, but also extremely different in some vital regard that I just can't quite put my finger on.
We obviously hope you have a good time there and are able to see some of the sites.
So yeah, have a great time, Jasper. Bring that back lots and lots of news subscriptions and money to the business. What do you mean it's not why you're going there for? And we'll play out with the wonderful Anita Ward, talking about just the shock of what it is to have this overnight sensation hit. It's the gold record, Anita.
Bye.
Bye.
Hurrah.
It was up on his suggestion. He said, well, why don't you substitute teach? He said, because if in case something happens with the record, that would allow you flexibility
Right.
with your schedule to get out of subbing in case you got to go on behalf of this record. Well, he was absolutely right, because I got to sub about 4 months, okay? And he called me on a Thursday, okay? And he said, I got great news for you. And I said, well, what is it? He said, your record has gone gold after 2 weeks, okay? And they want you to do a show in California for Wolfman Jack,
Yeah.
okay? What was that show called? The Midnight Special?
Yeah.
He says, they want you to do the Midnight Special. And so I said, well, that's great, Steve. I said, Chuck, I said, but I got to teach class tomorrow. That's the way I was. I have to give
2
that.
weeks, though.
2 weeks.
And you didn't even know anything was percolating like that.
Well, we just didn't know. We didn't know. And I said, wow, it's going to go. He said, yep, and people want you. So sure enough, they sent in a choreographer from New York. That was on a Thursday. They had 2 dancers and background singers. And this guy got the parts of my body I didn't know I had. No, we did. I'm serious. Because I never was a dancer anyway. And I said, oh, my God, is this ever going to, And we were getting ready to do that show. That was on a Friday and Saturday. That Monday, we went and shot for wardrobe in Memphis.
Okay.
Okay? Because that's how quick in Memphis we shot for wardrobe. And Tuesday morning, I was doing the show.
That was Anita Ward in conversation with Tom Graves in 2016, concluding this week's Rock's Backpages podcast. The hosts were Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison Bowie. For a list of articles discussed and full show notes, please visit rocksbackpages.com/podcast. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com.
Cut this bit out, Jasper.